This is the When Work Isn't Work podcast. This podcast exists to help people reignite the love of what they do in a post-pandemic world. The pandemic gave us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reflect on what is truly important to us in work and in life. I'm your host, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director of Lotus People, an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency. We hope you enjoy today's chat. Hello and welcome to When Work Isn't Work. I am so excited to welcome my guest today, Vanessa Bennett, to the podcast. Vanessa is a high performance coach who has worked with athletes, executives, and teams to support them in their growth and success. Previously, she has had a huge executive career within financial services, climbing the ladder and achieving great success herself. But in 2018, she studied a Master's of Psychology in Neuroscience and now uses her studies to help leaders and businesses optimize productivity and energy without burnout. When I first met Vanessa, I was so impressed by her. I knew our conversations would continue, and this podcast is perfectly timed for the start of the year. So Vanessa, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Great to be here with you, Sinead.
Oh, you're already your energy. As soon as we started speaking before we recorded, you have such a calm energy. You don't have the freneticness. Maybe it's January, maybe it's what you devoted your life to, but you don't have the frenetic energy that I would be more used to. About myself.
I know, it's funny. People kind of equate like energy being like and really out there. And no, we're pretty calm here at Next Evolution Performance. You can have lots of mental energy without feeling like you've got to have that really sort of out there physical energy as well.
Which feels like it's a magic solution, a magic pill to take. So when I heard you speak about this, the fact that you can be calm and achieve a lot, but without that kind of hectic madness, I was like, sorry, this is an option, really? So I'm so excited to dig into this. I guess firstly, for context, could you give a brief overview of your career and the business as it is today? And then we'll go and dig back into how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use neuroscience to help really driven business leaders and their teams to be able to improve their performance, productivity, and energy, but all without burnout, sickness, mental health problems, and all of that often goes with it. So we're very much about making sure that the performance is sustainable. And I guess I've always really been interested in this space because I am from a corporate background, and I saw so many people getting burnt out who didn't need to be. I saw a lot of people who seemed to be very, very busy, but I didn't necessarily see their output as reflecting that level of busy that they were promoting. So I've always been one, maybe I'm just inherently lazy. I think that's a big part of it. It's like if I can just do something and get an outcome in the easiest way possible, I've always been all for that. And I guess, when I was starting to lead teams, I was head of sales for a global funds management company, which included during the global financial crisis. So we had to work really, really hard, more than we had to previously. And we had to make sure that we didn't burn anyone out because I wasn't able to replace anyone if they left. So I really needed to make sure that we were firing on all cylinders. I needed to make sure that people really had the right mindset. Every second of every day was counting in terms of being productive and really helping us to achieve those goals in the easiest way possible. So that's kind of always been my obsession, and now we've really managed to build a business on this, which is going gangbusters, as you can imagine, especially given the pandemic, and now there's way more of a spotlight on this than there ever was. So yeah.
No, you're exactly right. And it made me think of last year, the Great Resignation was obviously a huge buzzword, and it's kind of faded away now because what happened last year happened, and we're kind of onto a different phase or a different stage in the market, sort of post-COVID. But every article I read, and boy, did I read a lot of articles, but every article I read about the Great Resignation, one of the most often and most common reasons cited for people resigning was burnout. And I know I felt that during COVID, and working so hard in such a different kind of macroeconomic environment and such a different way of needing to show up and needing to be, because it was something that we were all dealing with. That was this huge, huge, impactful, in many cases awful situation, and it absolutely resulted in burnout. And I could see it in everyone around me, from the team to clients to people who couldn't get overseas. It was just so huge. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that you're going gangbusters, because there's such a need for it at the moment. So it's definitely the right time to be within this space. And I think you caught you got in there early in terms of getting the messaging in, and being really passionate about something that you kind of knew was coming, I suppose. So tell me a little bit about then the studies. I know I picked your brains on this as well, but going back and studying psychology and a master's of science, when your background was as an executive and within financial services and in a very totally different corporate sort of space. So talk to me through sort of that's going back to study and how it all came about.
Yes, there were certainly some anxious moments. So, as you say, my background is obviously all in financial services. Even just things like business writing, and for all my studies around that, is a very different way of writing to writing scientifically. I've always had a really keen interest in this space, and I think ever since more of the research around neuroscience has come out, it's definitely been an area that I wanted to focus more on, that intersection of psychology and neuroscience. So you can't really have one without the other at the moment. So that's a really exciting spot to be in. So I knew that I wanted to study it, but obviously I had to really think about how I go about doing that. And I just reached out and asked for help from all my teaching fellows who were willing to give it to me. And to be fair, King's College London, where I did my master's degree, they were amazing, and they really worked with me to help me to write scientifically. And once I got that sorted, I was pretty much good to go. So I managed to graduate with distinction, which was fantastic. But we really had to, I really had to focus on, how do I fit all of this in? I'm already pretty organized. I needed to find an extra, roughly 20 to 30 hours a week to fit it in on top of work. And that's hard for anyone who studied part-time know that that's quite hard. And given I was already quite organized as a starting point, I was like, oh, how do I do this? And, we just applied more of our frameworks. I just basically applied them to the nth degree. And that was how I made sure that I was able to not spend any more time studying than I had to make sure that I could get the outcomes with the least amount of effort possible, and still keep doing that with our business as well. So yeah, pleased to say it all worked out.
Yeah, and one of our previous guests, Natalie Ranke Goldman, she's very impressive and has had a similarly impressive corporate career, and went back to study psychology. And she said so much of what she's done as a coach and as a leader has been on the human condition and learning about kind of the brain and how people operate. But what she wasn't prepared for was the science aspect, and the fact that it is actually all of the stats and everything that you're required to do. She kind of went, oh yeah, there's this bit. This is not what I am used to doing. This is not how my brain works, and how I've sort of learned and been trained to process information. So I imagine that was a big learning curve. But as you say, when there's people supporting you, you can kind of get to grips with that and then really lean into it and obviously progress quickly. What I'm really interested in hearing you say that is the information that you were learning. Were you sort of being told, okay, this is through neuroscience, through what we know, through the research, this is how you can optimize productivity, and you were learning that? Did you then, was it a case of just immediate application and kind of going, that's how it works? Or was there a big sort of bit of understanding for you to go, there's something in this? Like how did that sort of light bulb go off for you?
It's so interesting. I think some of this was a little bit intuitive in a few things. Even just going back to things like, looking at, even 20 years ago, when I first started in corporate, there wasn't really a lot of research out there at that time saying that if I exercise, I'm going to be more productive for you. So it's in your best interest as an employer that you promote my ability to do that. And when you think about it, 20 years ago in corporate, people used to think that if you were going out to go to the gym, you were wasting time.
Yeah.
And so, there was even just to that extent, now there is so much more research showing that. But obviously, there's a lot around that. How does the brain function around the way that we think? So it's not even a productivity piece. It's literally how does our brain think and change to the way that we think. So it's this intersection of how do we choose our thoughts, how do we respond to stress, how do we train our brains to be physiologically better to be able to cope with stress. Because when you think about some of the issues in the workplace, a lot of it comes down to negative behavior. We need to think about what causes the negative behavior. We need to think about what is productive, how does the brain work. So even just a lot more of this research, which we're able to take out and apply straight away, just in terms of, how is the brain built to function? And sometimes we're more productive than others, and we have different forms of cognitive energy during the day, and even what is cognitive energy and what is taking our cognitive energy, and all of that kind of thing. There was just so much more that we could literally just take straight and apply, which has been really great. And some of it just gave a lot more rigor to some of the things that we sort of intuitively knew in the first place. But I think understanding a lot around the mindset piece as well, that was probably something to have a lot more rigor around this idea of neuroplasticity, and how do we incorporate this into the culture in companies? What does that mean for your learning culture? What does that mean for your accountability culture? What does that mean for psychological safety? All of these kind of things, we can train that, and being able to change our brains accordingly is a really exciting thing, and it really puts accountability back onto the individuals as well. So, this whole I'm really tired and it's my boss's fault, like, no. All right. As a boss, we need to coach people on how to manage their cognitive energy, but it is very much the employee's responsibility to make sure that they're also implementing that. So it is a two-way street. So we need to really put this accountability back on people to implement these frameworks that we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've said, it's a cultural piece that will vary. There'll be more work to do in one business than another. And that will be down to everything from the personality of the leaders to how things are done around here, to it's the culture and sort of expectations that's woven into a business to determine how that will vary and differ in business to business. When I heard you speak, when you came in and spoke to us a few months ago, you spoke a lot about cognitive energy, and I honestly haven't stopped thinking about it. I use the phrase a lot, and it's something that's always front of mind for me now, so thank you for that. How would you define that when you go into businesses, when you're speaking with leaders and teams? Like, what is cognitive energy to you, and what do you mean when you refer to it?
Yeah, so cognitive energy, and even to be fair, researchers kind of don't necessarily agree on what to call it. If you're from a psychology background, you might call it a bit more emotional energy. Some people might call it mental energy. I tend to call it cognitive energy because that's generally what we refer to it in a neuroscience space. But generally speaking, if we think about your brain is metabolically hungry. So your brain actually takes in about 25% of the fuel that we take into our bodies. So anything that we eat, pretty much 25% of it ends up in the brain. So a little frightening sometimes when you think of it like that. But people think of energy as just a physical thing, but it's a mental thing. And so what happens is, we have, just as an example, we have about 4 hours a day of what we call heavy cognitive energy available to us. Now, do the math, that's a lot less than the average day that people are working. That doesn't mean that we can't be really productive doing other things. It just means that anything that's taking a lot of heavy cognitive work for us, we need to make sure that we're maximizing those 4 hours a day. So cognitive energy can be affected by how we structure our days. Are we doing the right tasks at the right time? But it can also be, how do we spend that kind of cognitive or mental energy on things that maybe takes our energy and we don't even realize. So negativity, complaining about things, listening to other people complain about things, all of these things really drain our energy. And so that can have a massive impact on how we show up for our families, how we show up for our friends, and obviously very much how we show up for work. And if we think about burnout is basically caused, it's not really a physical thing in most cases. Now, obviously, if you're an Olympian and you are overtraining physically, that can lead to very much a physical and therefore a mental burnout. But I'm not dealing with too many people in the corporate space who are training that hard physically that's what's causing their burnout. Okay, it's generally what we call this burnout that is being by overspending cognitive energy. All right. So if we try to overspend that cognitive energy that we have in a day, then that will lead to burnout. And that this is why people are getting burnt out. And people don't give cognitive energy the respect that it deserves in the role that it plays. All right. So we understand that if we are athletes and athletes overtrain and overtrain and overtrain, they're going to get a physical burnout. But we need to equate that in the workspace. We are mental athletes. And if we overspend in the cognitive energy space, then of course we're going to lead to that mental burnout, which can lead, therefore, to physical burnout as well. So that will affect your stress levels, your ability to cope with stress. You'll go into adrenal fatigue. There could be mental health problems, all of this kind of thing. But generally speaking, it's because people are overspending cognitive energy that leads to burnout in the workplace.
It's absolutely fascinating, and as you say, we're knowledge workers. It is like, this is how we burn out, by overusing our brain. We're not over exercising. We're not kind of out in the sunshine every day doing manual labor. Like, we're the people listening to this, and our audience will all be knowledge workers, and so it has to be cognitive. Like, that's where our energy gets spent. That's why we're tired at the end of the day, even though we've mostly been sitting at laptops or engaging with team members. Honestly, I find it absolutely fascinating. I feel like I've run Lotus for almost, I mean, it's over 7 years now. And I honestly think my biggest challenge, like, there's been a million challenges, COVID and got so many, but my biggest one has been my own energy preservation. And I'm such a driver as a person that I go all the time, want to do a million things. I want to say yes to everything. And then 25% of the way through these massive, huge projects that I've taken on and loaded on all at the same time, I burn out. And I'm like, that's a mental way to approach life. I genuinely have strategy meetings where my amazing advisors and my team will literally say, no to that, you can't do that. And what I want to do gets shrunk down literally to about 20% of what it was, because I have reasonable people around me. So it's a constant in my life, and I've suffered from burnout. I set up Lotus in 2015. I was 27. I had the energy of a 27-year-old, and my business partner and I, in our first year, we were hugely successful. We went to 0 to 1,000 in a very, very short amount of time. It was just hyper growth. It was super exciting, but I burnt out so much. I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I ended up spending 3 months out of the business because I was my nervous system was frayed. I was absolutely shattered and absolutely run into the ground. And I looked back when I got better, and I couldn't understand why I wasn't well. And I looked back at my diary, and I legitimately had about 15 meetings a day, would start the day at 5 p.m. to do the actual work, would come home by midnight. It was insane. As you're talking about that, I think so few people, I'm even thinking about the team and sharing this with people. And I'm so excited already to share this podcast with people, because having that awareness, as you've described, around understanding that you only have 4 hours in a day. How would you recommend for someone to kind of understand where their cognitive energy is being spent? Because it will vary very much person to person. The introvert might spend more cognitive energy on interpersonal interactions, where somebody else might kind of enjoy that, and that would kind of fill their cup up. So how would you go about sort of defining that, or starting as a...
It's a really great point. So we, in our workshops, we tend to talk about this concept of energy credits. So imagine you have 100 a day, and then how you choose to spend them is totally up to you. But if you, assuming everything's working according to plan, and we go into more detail about what that is in our workshops, but assuming everything's going according to plan, you have 100. You might not have 100. If you only wake up with 60, you only get to spend 60. So people are always obsessed with, like, well, how do I get more energy credits? And it's like, really, the trick is actually stop spending them unnecessarily. Okay, and so like you say, different people will be spending different amount of energy credits on different things. All right, so some people, will find that being with other people is energizing and almost gives them energy credits. Other people will be like, oh my gosh, that's just draining 30% of my energy credits for the day. I'm someone who, it's quite funny, like I really hate cooking. Like I would rather do a keynote in front of 1,000 people than have to cook. So, needless to say, I don't cook. Ironically, my husband has basically built a whole empire based on food. He owns a bucket load of restaurants, finds cooking quite relaxing, hates public speaking more than anything.
I'm definitely in his camp.
So we divide and conquer. But it's one of those things where it's like we don't judge it, because if we're spending energy credits judging ourselves for what we find energizing and what drains our energy, well, that's just a pointless waste of time. So, so the first thing is just to start to keep a bit of a log as to what you're spending in terms of energy credits, what gives you energy, what takes it away, all of that kind of thing, and then start to make sure that you're managing your energy throughout the day accordingly. So I'm actually not really worried about how many hours people are working. It's got nothing to do with the hours that people are working. I've got people who work 16 hours a day seamlessly, effortlessly. I have other people that are in a heap up to 7 hours a day at work. So when they first come to us. So it's not the hours that you spend, it's what you're spending your energy on, how you're spending it. And again, we need to make sure that we're thinking about how do we do everything as easy as possible. And that then comes down to how do I spend less energy credits on that?
Yeah, it's the classic work smarter, not harder. And I think it's this day and age, I think I've intuited for the last few years sort of where my energy gets spent and that there must be better ways of managing it. But I'm so aware of the fact that, especially coming back from leave, I'm back 3 days and I've got, if I want to be as diligent as I am and clear everything down and feel like I'm on top of everything, I would be going in and clearing down hundreds of emails, my entire LinkedIn notifications, all of my LinkedIn messages, my team, all of the Slack Teams messages that I've got over the break, getting back to everyone. Plus I have naturally a full week of meetings. I don't have a week of up. So I had a really strong word with myself on Monday, and I was really strong in my intention of saying, you won't be able to do all of that. If you do all of that by Tuesday and you feel great, diligent, I've ticked everything off, you'll be burnt out. And what a way is that to start the year? And so it's really hard. It's a battle because I'm a doer, I'm a to-do list person. I want to tick everything off, but I also know that it comes at a cost, and it absolutely will come at the cost of my energy being completely emptied by the first couple of days. I love what you said about, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how frequently this happens, but the fact that you kind of drain energy credits, judging yourself, and paraphrasing, but judging yourself and criticizing on top of that. Is that something you see often?
Always. We are our own worst enemies. So it's really interesting how your thoughts can really, take a lot of your energy. And sometimes your thoughts aren't even necessarily true. If you ask other people what they thought of you with certain things, they wouldn't worry about that at all. So, this whole criticism, so there's a lot of emotions that are actually just a complete waste of time. Like guilt. Guilt is just an unproductive emotion, and it's just draining energy credits. So either make a change to do something about it or let it go. So the quicker we can kind of, I guess, sort of triage what is really worthy of our energy credits and what isn't, the quicker we can move on and do things. But I think it's really important to make sure that, the thoughts that we're having are actually serving us and are a productive use of energy credits, not a draining use of energy credits. So neuroscientifically, it's quite interesting. We actually can't have a negative thought at the same time as we have a positive thought. So if we are thinking more productively in our thoughts, it's not neuroscientifically possible to be beating ourselves up at the same time. So the more when we realize that we're doing that, the more that we can kind of turn our attention to something else that is a more productive way of thinking, that can be really versatile and super useful as well. So yeah, lots of good things there.
it's fascinating, and that's where the neuroplasticity comes in, right? Because if you can catch yourself and have the awareness and the consciousness to then be able to shift from negative to positive and catch those negative thoughts as they're happening, then that's where the neuroplasticity comes in. And you don't do it twice and your brain's rewired. It requires obviously repetition, and it requires the need to divert and to continue to focus on that. But I remember someone describing neuroplasticity and changing and rewiring neural pathways to me like shaking, or it was like a ski slope, and the sort of imprint of where the skis have gone are embedded, because everyone's going over the exact same spot. But if you shake it like a snow globe, you have the opportunity to create new tracks in the snow. And that's essentially what neuroplasticity is. But it takes work, because over time, the more you think about something in the same way again and again and again, it's really embedded, and so it's going to take quite a lot of work to essentially get it going in a different direction. But it's amazing, and it's I love that the positive and negative emotions can't exist together. I remember reading previously that anxiety and breath can't coexist in the body, and so if you are heavy on breath, again, you're out of your brain, you're into your body, and suddenly you're on a different path and focused on something else. It's so interesting. And for you, when you went through this whole process, I imagine there's a strong amount of sort of a good amount of your experience that you would have known your strengths, you would have intuited what you yourself, kind of how you want to spend your day and where you want to spend your energy credits. How was that process in identifying your strengths and in making the decision to go over to sort of neuroscience and studying in this area and coaching? Was that kind of a learning exercise yourself, or did you just know this is my jam and I need to get into this?
I think I'd always kind of been feeling that even when I worked in corporate. So that was a really big part of what I did. And I found like there was a lot of companies out there that would help, because having run a sales team, there's a lot of companies out there coaching sales skills and kind of productivity and old school time management and things like that. But there was nothing really focusing on this high performance piece without the burnout. And so that was when I kind of realized that, this is actually what I want to do. And I kind of had to grapple with it for a while, because I was thinking, I'm 95%, because this was like 10 years ago. So I'm 95% sure I'm onto something, but I'm 5% completely wetting myself, but I'll take that. So given that I had such a good track record in sales, I knew that, you know what, if I didn't like it or if it didn't work out, I'll give it 2 years and then someone will pay me to sell something if I want to go back to corporate. And that was 10 years ago. So obviously, things have really been on the up for us, which is great. So, and I think the appetite has definitely, people are now seeing, it used to be only sort of forward-thinking companies that we would work with 10 years ago, whereas now it's becoming a little bit more mainstream in terms of this idea of burnout is a thing. I think it also really helped when the World Health Organization and the International Classification of Diseases officially called burnout a syndrome, and really made it awareness. And I think, definitely working towards the legalities of that as well. If you're an employer who understands that burnout is going on in your organization, you're not doing anything about it, that's a really big lawsuit waiting to happen. And it shouldn't be that it would be a lawsuit that would make you do something about it. You should actually be caring about your employees, not just from a welfare perspective, but it is actually from a productivity perspective. I am one of the most results-driven people I know. So if all of this wasn't leading to greater results, then I can understand that people would be a little bit like, oh, that's a nice to have. Whereas I look at it going, you can't afford not to do this. That is literally going to make a massive difference in terms of staff turnover is costly to a business, mental health leave is costly to a business, sick leave is costly to a business. All of these things, and not to mention the lack of performance as to where you could be in terms of revenues. So when you look at that, depending on the size of the business, this can make millions of dollars of difference to a bottom line. Who wouldn't want to give some form of attention to that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the tech businesses were the first to do it when we started having kind of seeing the rise in Google and all of the LinkedIn and all of the kind of first original huge unicorn tech companies. I remember when I was finishing university and a lot of my peers went to Google and it was like, oh my God, they have ping pong tables and they have fridges with the food that you can help yourself to. And it was called the Google Stone when everyone put on weight because they started eating all of Google's free food. But everything was focused on, it was really employee centric and it was really focused on wellness and balance. And it wasn't because Google was just this amazing, generous, and all of the other tech companies were these gorgeous, generous companies who only had employee welfare at heart. Of course, that was part of it. But of course, there's a level of awareness around the fact that productive workers and people who are sort of holistically balanced and coming to work with sharp minds and feeling like their other needs in life are being met and they're able to support them in that results in higher productivity. And it makes absolute sense commercially to have a situation where people are well as creating a culture where, of course, as you mentioned, people are psychologically safe and actually enjoying coming to work. It just makes the whole experience in every facet so much more enjoyable. And with regards to, I guess, the what we touched on before, the judgment piece. I remember reading once Susan Cain's book Quiet, because I'm an extroverted introvert, but I am an introvert, and I always saw in kind of everyone around me, extroverts, huge salespeople, just a very different kind of profile to sort of what the type of person I was. And if I think about the level of energy that I spent in my first maybe 5 years in the industry, just questioning whether I was in the right job, it would have taken up half my day in terms of cognitive load. And so I think, about all of us who, whether it's women, whether it's men who doubt ourselves, have imposter syndrome, you're just layering on extra layers of things to think about. Do you see people getting out of that easily? Like when we think about shifting from negative to positive, is it something that people can kind of do with a switch, or do you see it kind of progress and breakthroughs happening often?
It takes practice. So we think of it as like a muscle. So if you've been really good at thinking negatively or unhelpfully, like you're just going to naturally, that's going to be your default. You're just going to get really, really good at that. So we need for people firstly to understand what's happening in the brain as to how that's not necessarily serving them and what we need to create in terms of other wiring. And so the thing is, like muscles, you can't just get rid of one muscle and use another one. Like that other muscle is always going to want to take over, but we need to do isolation exercises if we want to build an underactive muscle, which is essentially what we're doing with the unhelpful thinking or the negative thinking. And for some people, even just that switch of thinking about it, not necessarily as negative but positive, but thinking about it as helpful versus unhelpful. So if we're thinking unhelpfully, sometimes that's just a sucky situation and we don't want to go, oh, isn't that the best thing ever? Like, well, no, that's a sucky situation. But we can think in terms of, well, what's a helpful way to think about this instead? There's always a solution. How do we move forward? How do we deal with the cards that we've been dealt? All of these kind of things. So the more that we can, I find that starts to flick a switch initially. It's like, it doesn't have to be positive. It just has to be helpful. So if we can think about it as unhelpful and helpful rather than negative and positive, that can create a switch. Then for people to understand that it is going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So anytime that we have a situation where you've got an underactive muscle and an overactive muscle, like if we were training it physically, we need to really make sure that we're isolating the underactive muscle so that we force that to work. And so when we kind of understand this, explain the science behind that, then people are in more of a position to go, oh, okay, this is what I do about that. And it can be something simple. We don't just look at a really hard situation and look at the helpful way of thinking. We actually just look at diverting people's attention to a different thing altogether as a starting point. Like it might be, oh, I'm in this negative self-talk. Okay, I'm going to think about how much I love my puppy. Like it's completely unrelated, but if you think about how much you love your puppy for 10 seconds, that's 10 seconds that you're not adding to the unhelpful wiring. So that's a good result. And then we just get better at doing that. So I wouldn't say it's like flicking a switch, oh, now I'm just naturally working that muscle. But
Yeah.
when we understand the science and we keep at it and we keep doing the work, we can get some really big breakthroughs in that. But it's a very important part of making sure that we're directing cognitive energy into something that is helpful versus something that is not helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And do you find that most people who you and your team work with are open to it? Because in instances, of course, it'll be managers or executives who kind of bring you guys in, and not everyone has agreed kind of, yeah, this hunted you down and said, absolutely, this is what I want. Is there a general sort of, I guess, openness to this type of work?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think people are kind of at the point where they're tired of being tired. So they're
Yes.
looking for things that are out there. But interestingly enough, we have an order in which we do things. So we never go straight to the mindset work. Because if someone's really tired, like, it takes cognitive energy to choose to think differently to your default. All right.
Mm.
So if your default is unhelpful thinking and you're exhausted, you're just going to think unhelpfully because that's just easier. So we need to make sure that we can start with this idea of how do we structure our days, our weeks, our months and years to use less energy credits. That then
Mhm.
frees up some extra energy to be able to choose to think differently. So we always do what we call the neural piece, the structural piece first. How do we save some energy credits just by how we structure our days?
Mm.
Then we go into the mindset piece. And it's really interesting, especially towards the end of last year, but I mean, this happens quite frankly in every year. It's like, oh, we want everyone to start with a really great mindset. And we just want to be able to flick a switch on mindset with a 45-minute keynote. And I'm like, I love your enthusiasm and your faith in us that you think that we can do that. But I will always say to them first, okay, tell me about the energy levels. I'll say, describe your team's energy levels to me on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being we have all the energy we need to effectively meet our goals
Yeah.
that are meaningful to us, and 1 being I'm a step up from the fetal position. And if people come to us and they say, oh, yeah, everyone's energy is about a 4 out of 10, I'm like, they're not listening to a presentation on mindset. They're just tuning out because that's 45 minutes they don't actively have to think about something.
Yeah.
So, you can't expect a really tired group of people to all of
Yeah.
a sudden choose to think differently. It neuroscientifically just doesn't work that way. So we
Yeah.
need to make sure that people are really understanding of how do we save energy credits by maximizing our 4 hours of power a day. How do we get
Yes.
more done in 4 hours than the average person gets done in 6 hours? That's going
Yeah.
to make us feel like we're accomplishing things. That's going to make it feel easy to get through the to-do list. That's going to
Mhm.
free up some energy credits to go and do more energy-giving activities to help us to do that. So once we can really understand the easy wins of how to create more energy credits in the day by saving more of them, then we can start to talk about mindset. If someone's already got heaps of energy, and if all of that's going well and the way they structure their days feels effortless and all of that is fine, then we can go to mindset straight away. But after 3 years of the pandemic, I haven't met many companies where when I ask them about the energy levels, I think the best we get is about a 7 out of 10. That's the
Yeah.
best we've got in the last 2 years when we ask that question. And that is only just bordering on okay to start going to the mindset piece.
And in the nature of what we do, we naturally touch and come in contact with so many organizations and individuals. And I completely agree with you. The collective sentiment is one of exhaustion. And I mean, I'm only back 2 days, so I don't know how much that differs coming into a new year, and hopefully people having the opportunity to have a break. But across the board, the last few years, people are drained, they're tired, they're exhausted. So I completely agree with you. I think you're probably the only person I've met in the last few years who isn't giving off the energy of, oh, I'm shattered. Which is
Well,
good.
exactly.
Bring up
And
now.
but you raise an important point, Sinead. It's like that's not that's become normal, but it's not
Mhm.
normal, and we shouldn't be accepting that of like, oh, I'm just tired because I work really hard. Well, like, really, is that the best you can get for the next 30 years of your career at work? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. People deserve better. People deserve to be working in a way where they are successful and it feels virtually effortless. And so if we are really tired at the end of each day, that is not right. And we shouldn't be accepting that.
Mm-hmm. I'm honestly like hanging on every word because I am mostly tired at the end of every day. I love what I do. I'm exhausted. It, it's fascinating, and I think you're right. I think we have absolutely accepted that that is the norm. That is almost a status symbol. Busy is something that you kind of look to for. And I know myself, if I have a week where I haven't been rammed with meetings, something in my psyche is like, oh, you haven't been doing much this week. And I then, if I have a free afternoon that I've kept for like some sort of creative work, I'll go, oh, no meetings in today. What else can I put in? Yeah, I'm actually free on Wednesday afternoon. Pop it in there. And it's madness. So there's layers of things I imagine that come into it. And can I ask, when you go through this process, I mean, obviously when businesses and individuals work with you, this is something that's hugely intensive. You go through a huge amount of work and consult and do a lot to obviously support them. But I guess high level, if someone's saying, okay, I want to look at that scheduling piece and I want to look at my week and make sure, and particularly at the start of the year, I suppose, make sure I'm not draining myself every day. Where does that start? Is that kind of better timings? Because I'm a morning person, I'll do this sort of work in the morning. I will prioritize better. I will delegate. Like, where would you sort of say the kind of key points high level are for getting started with better structure for more energy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we even have an online course about this now
Yeah.
because it's such an important thing for people to be able to access,
Yeah.
and not everyone's going to have their companies that will be able to access it. So we believe that individuals should be able to invest in themselves at a really low price point to be able to access that. So, so the crux of that, we would look at things like, how do you understand and how do you tap into when you have most of your cognitive energy? What are your 4 hours of power in the day? And then, like you say, a lot of it comes down to, what do we get off the to-do list, so that we're really focusing on the things that are important to us, and we're not just being busy for the sake of being busy. So it's really getting clear on your goals and what goals are important to you. And so, we don't want to be doing stuff that we don't necessarily need to do.
Yeah.
We need to also focus on, what it is that trains our energy. How do we keep track of that? How do we really focus on not judging it, but how do we make sure that we understand what's taking energy credits, what's giving energy credits, what do we need to fill us up, what do we need to spend less energy credits? It also comes down to a concept we call personal pace. And this is, think about your focus time. So neuroscience suggests that the average attention span or focus time for a lot of people is around, for average is around 45 minutes, but that's average. So some people are a much shorter focus time, some people are a much longer focus time. And so it's different for everybody. So we have an indicator which we allow people to go through, either with our online course or with our open live workshops, or what we would do if we're doing closed workshops for large corporates. We allow everyone to have access to this pace indicator, and it helps people to work out what is their natural attention span and then what rate are they actually working at. So if you've got a really short attention span but you're trying to focus for much longer,
Yeah.
it's going to absolutely bleed energy credits for you.
Yeah.
So if we can help you to understand what that is and then close up that gap,
Yeah.
someone who's got an attention span of 45 minutes who's being interrupted every 10 minutes, that's really draining. Someone who's got an attention span of 10 minutes who's have to focus on something for 45 minutes, that's no better. That's really draining as well. And so when you add all of these elements together, and you can save 5 energy credits here and 10 energy credits there and even 2 energy credits there, it all adds up. So you don't have to implement this to the nth degree. If you do, you will probably end up with an extra 2 to 3 hours of effective time in your day. But
Mhm.
even if you just save a few energy credits here and there, and you
Yeah.
save an extra 15 to 30 minutes of effective time in your day, but it feels easier, so that you are more delightful to be around. And you become a better leader, and you
Yeah.
become, a better father or mother or whatever. You become a better friend. Whatever that works out to be,
Yeah.
that's a good thing as well. So all of these things happen together. So I always say to people, it's a continuum. It's not binary. It's not a case of you implement this 100% or you don't do any of it. It's like,
Yeah.
if you just make 1 or 2 key changes that start to free up some energy credits and to free up some time for you, then you're doing it. And the more that you do it, the more you'll want to do more of it. So yeah, so that's why, going back to these workshops and even to an online course where we can kind of drip feed it is a really great way for people to be able to just tap into what works for them. Instead of being prescriptive around everyone should do this work at this time, that makes no sense. It depends on whether you find that work energizing or draining. It depends on when your cognitive energy is available, and it depends on your attention span. So, and that's just the starting point. That's not overlaying everything else. So it's about getting some of those foundations right first. And when we can help companies really focus on that, and that frees up energy credits to do other things. And that comes down into things like meeting time. I think one of the biggest cancers on people being able to be able to work to their energy is actually so much time that we've got this idea that meetings are productive. It's like, no, meetings are not productive. Like, the more meetings we have, then unless they're obviously client facing and things like that, but internal meetings, like that's a whole other podcast, but
Wanting to know your thoughts. I know they're not going to be favorable to meetings.
Exactly. So yeah, there's a lot of things there, and I always think, there's also another. Obviously, there's a lot of talk at the moment about moving to a 4-day work week, and it's like, well, let's think about why people are wanting to do that. If you're really miserable about how you're working 5 days a week, of course you want to be moving to only 4 days a week. But if we can get you feeling like 5 days a week is effortless, then we can be more productive. Because if we've only got 4 hours a day of heavy cognitive energy available to us, and as a business you want to move to doing that in 4 days, well, you're only going to have 16 hours a week per person, as opposed to 20 hours a week per person of heavy cognitive energy available. So this whole, and it's really interesting when I've seen people say, oh, but we just got more efficient about the way we spent less time in meetings so that we could do 4 days a week. I'm like, why don't you do that over 5 days? You shouldn't be doing that just because you're trying to cut out a day at work. Like, you should be doing that anyway. So yeah, that's a whole other podcast too.
No, it's so interesting, and it's funny because I've read and researched the 4-day work week, and I'm so interested in it. And if I actually think what's underneath that, why am I drawn to it? Why is that something I think that I would like to do? It's absolutely to do with energy preservation, and feeling like 5 days of flogging is exhausting. Flogging for 4 days and having 3 days to recover would be more favorable. But then at the same time, exactly as you've described, what about 5 days of not flogging? What about 5 days that are energizing? That just seems a relatively unfamiliar concept. But I'm signed up for one of your courses, so I'm very excited to get into the granular, and I'll definitely share the links as well, because I think everything that I've spoken to you about so far today, but also previously, it's just struck a chord. And I know that, as I said, the collective consciousness of Australia, of Sydney, is just, professionals are exhausted. I'm exhausted. Maybe not today because I've been on leave for so long, but after the break, but it's a thing. So I think you're definitely striking a chord in the right place. To, I guess, finish up today, if people are listening and this is resonating the way it does with me, what is one, other than obviously sign up for the course, what is one, which I think would be a great idea, and I'm very excited about doing it, what is one bit of advice that you would give to people on where to start? It's a new year. We're all thinking about new approaches, resolutions, goals, shift in focus. But where would you start if we're already feeling a bit run down and tired looking at the year ahead?
I think the first thing is to realize that that's not normal, and that there are things that we can understand, and we can use a lot of neuroscience around this to do it. So I think being open to that. I think if you're just resigned to the fact that I just work really hard and I'm going to be really tired, I think that's really sad. So, how about we come back and just go, there is a solution to this. Just because you haven't found it yet doesn't mean it's not there. So let's firstly be excited about the idea that there's options that we can work with. And the next part from that would just be, start thinking about energy instead of time. All right, it's not a time thing that's the issue. All right, we are just overspending energy in ways that we don't have to. So, so I think that's probably the first thing, is for sort of like, as a concept and a philosophy, for people to start to get their head around it. It's really little to do with time. It's about the energy side of things. And then obviously, people want to go to our websites and look for our workshops and online courses and things like that, then, we'd love to engage with them. But I think, that's probably an area that they need to be open with in the first place. If people are just really, they're kind of either resigned to the fact they're being tired, or they just really enjoy being busy and tired, because that sort of equates to their level of meaning and things like that, then we can't really help at that stage. Yeah. So as long as people are open to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like anything, it's that self-awareness, and that catching something is the first step. So that makes total sense. And I'll definitely share the link when we release the podcast as well. So thank you so much for jumping on. I am very, very appreciative. That was amazing. Usually in podcasts, I'm sort of making notes as I go about sort of what to touch on and where the conversation can go. I'm taking notes today about all of the things that I want to take away from this conversation. So I've really, really taken a lot. So thank you. And hope you have the most wonderful 2023.
Thank you so much, Sinead. You too.
This podcast is sponsored by Lotus People Recruitment. We are an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency with a genuine human-first and innovative approach. Lotus People are disrupting the recruitment industry by placing quality and service at the heart of all we do. Recruiting roles across HR, talent, business support, and much more. Head to our website today for more information if you are a job seeker or an employer hiring staff. We're at lotuspeople.com.au.